What is difficulty in speedrunning? Difficulty is a metric that defines the viability of a singular action. It doesn't matter if that action is a short set of inputs or whether it's an entire setup to perform a major skip, because ultimately, how difficult that action is will determine whether or not you will even want to try it in the first place. For example, newer runners will lean towards the easier strats so that their speedruns are able to reach the end cleanly, whilst more experienced runners will experiment with the harder strats in order to gain an advantage over other players. Difficulty has no ceiling. However, there becomes a point when a trick becomes too difficult to perform under the context of a normal human being being able to perform it. This is when a tool-assisted speedrun would be used to perform the trick. However, in Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, there's a strategy that I would like to talk about today that for the longest time sat just below that threshold. This is a strategy that could not be ignored and made the level that it takes place in become the hardest level in the entire game. This is the history of Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg's most infamous skip. The trick in question takes place in Sand Ruins Mission 2, the boss level of the game's penultimate world. Sand 2 is a level that cannot be ignored as it gates off Sand 3, the level that is required to be beaten in order to unlock the game's final mission. The goal of Sand 2 is to reach the Dark Portal and beat the boss on the other side, and in order to reach that Dark Portal, you must take Billy across these islands floating over quicksand by traversing the underground tunnels that connect them. By this point of the game, the player is expected to have a clear understanding of the game's fundamentals, and this is conveyed through the many challenging segments that take place in these underground segments. The first major hurdle for any player will be the Rising Quicksand room, which is accessed from the second island. The player is tasked with hitting these switches as they will make the quicksand rise and allow you to progress. This room has some of the tightest jumps that the player will see yet. It has a lot of weird jank that can randomly occur, and you have to deal with all of this whilst the game throws some of the most annoying enemies in there with you. This room takes a while to complete, due in part to the puzzle itself and the slow cutscenes that play throughout the room. And this room is the reason why Sand 2 is so infamous for speedrunners, because there is a very well known trick that skips this entire segment. The Rising Quicksand room and the room before it can be skipped. And to be honest, when you look at where the islands are positioned, it makes a lot of sense. The islands are rather close together. Unfortunately, they aren't close enough to allow Billy to cross the gap with standard movement, but they aren't far enough away to call someone crazy for thinking that there may be a way across. And very early into the game's history, a method to cross the gap was discovered by the game's earliest pioneers, Fanboss and Ion. To cross the gap, they would perform a technique known as an object bounce. An object bounce is a trick that allows you to cover crazy distances in the air by egg bouncing into an object such as signs, trees, treasure chests, and chick NPCs, whilst holding the analog stick towards that object. Doing this, the game will eject you out of the object, and you can carry the momentum from this ejection by holding the analog stick away from the object the moment you have been launched. This was one of the game's earliest big discoveries. So looking at this island, it's not immediately apparent which object you could use to perform an object bounce. However, there is one object that could be used. This torch next to the door is what Ion and Fanboss were looking for. When using a giant egg, you can perform an object bounce against this torch and you can just about make it to the other island. And this trick would become known as torch skip. Though, there is one catch about torch skip. You see, whilst object bounces are fundamentally an easy trick to perform, torch skip is unlike the rest because torch skip is the trick that gates every single speedrun of Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg.
I'm asking for it. I won that. I shouldn't have trusted.
So, what makes this object bounce so different from the others? Well, let's start from the timing first of all. All object bounces use the same timing for when you want to switch from holding into the object to holding away. This is because all other objects that we use for object bounces are on the ground, so we basically just need to hold away when Billy hits the ground. This is not the case for torch skip, as the object that we're bouncing off is unique in the sense that it is elevated. We need to hold in for longer and therefore hold away later to get an effective bounce. You have to be aware of this difference, and this usually catches newer runners out when they're learning the trick. If you hold away too early, you don't get launched by the torch, and if you hold away too late, you don't carry enough speed to cross the gap. But I'll be honest, the timing isn't even that difficult to overcome. The difficulty comes from the fact that the object is on fire. So the fire on the torch has a hitbox that can damage Billy, because why wouldn't it? We're lucky that the fire doesn't damage eggs, but the fire damaging Billy is still a massive problem, especially when this boy is spinning wildly around on the egg when setting up for this trick. But what could possibly happen if Billy takes damage? It can't be that bad. Well, you see, there are two usual outcomes that will occur if this does happen. 1. Billy will get knocked off the egg and fall directly into the quicksand, killing him. 2. Billy will get knocked off the egg and survive, but the egg will fall into the torch's collision. This will force the egg to be ejected out of the torch, rolling it into the quicksand, killing the egg. Both results are terrible, as you still have to grow another egg to full size, and this will lose you at least 30 seconds either way. But is this a common occurrence? Oh my god, yes, this is so common. Object bounces are better the further into an object you go, so for torch skip to work, you need to commit to going quite far into the torch to achieve the desired bounce. Now it is very easy to overextend, which is the easiest way to damage Billy. This time loss due to overextending on torch skip then opens a whole new can of worms to talk about. In order to do torch skip consistently, you need to get over the mental barrier. Because the punishment of failing torch skip is so rough, especially when taking damage is so easy, the most common way that people fail torch skip is simply being too scared of the torch. Going too far into the torch will kill you, right? But do you know what else will kill you? Not going far enough into the torch. As I said, you need to commit when going for this skip. You can't wimp out as you won't cross the gap, and you can't be overly confident either. This balancing act is difficult for every player to overcome, especially when every speedrunner's worst enemy gets involved. I am of course talking about nerves. Sand 2 is where the game's difficulty will peak. It will make and break a speedrun because of this one trick, so it makes sense that nerves will affect a runner's judgment here, especially when the threshold to hit the trick correctly is so narrow. And the worst part is that this trick saves at least 90 seconds, and for the longest time, there was no other way to approach this trick. You either do it or you lose 90 seconds. The only thing that has made torch skip easier is simply the higher standard of play that has naturally occurred over 9 years of this game's speedrun history. Texture setups were found to help with the trick, but ultimately this does nothing to help the nerves. One thing runners did do though was perform slightly slower any percent routes that got to Sand 2 as quickly as possible, just to get torch skip done. Because it doesn't matter how godly your run is, the only thing that will be judging that run will be Sand 2 and torch skip, Billy Hatcher's hardest trick. Wait, what's a Fami? And how do you skip it? So yeah, torch skip takes the player to the midpoint of the level. This level is far from over. After you get past torch skip, you are taken underground again, through the pillars which are synonymous with the infamous Billy moment, and into every casual player's favourite section, the fog room. This section partially blinds the player whilst they navigate pitfalls to find the switch that opens the door leading to the boss portal. This is Sand 2's final obstacle, and it certainly isn't easy. For speedrunners though, this was alright. Navigating the room is easy once you know the layout. You could even skip half the puzzle by jumping straight to the switch. There was another object bounce that you could do as well. By bouncing into this sign and ricocheting off a larger egg, you could go from the switch to the door in no time at all. Except this trick allowed for very little wriggle room, so the runners that did this trick hated it, especially when there was a lack of visual clarity that made the launch hard to judge. However, unlike torch skip, this trick was nowhere near as important. A lot of runners just decided to forego the trick and run through the section as intended. And when you reach the exit of the room, you take these blue hoops and the dark portal awaits you. No matter which way the fog room was tackled, it was a part of everyone's speedrun for many years. But as the community became better at handling the fog room, a storm was brewing outside of the room because there may have been a way to reach the dark portal without entering the fog room. So yeah, there is a way to skip almost all of this final underground section of the level. In fact, it has been possible as far back as 2014 when STBM made their magnificent any percent task of Billy hatching the giant egg. Before I begin to explain the process in which the task does this trick, I think it is important to explain how it was possible in the first place. The main thing to know is that the dark portal is directly below the area where you start in Sand 1, the previous level. This of course is a problem, because this is an area that is normally inaccessible in Sand 2. However, if you could reach this area, it wouldn't be too far out of the realm of possibility that a shenanigan or two could reach the dark portal. And just like Torch Skip, this pyramid island isn't too far from the island where we enter the underground. You can reach the island from this chicken statue, and you can get onto the chicken statue with an egg bounce from the torch. So really, the objective here is to reach the torch. The task found a way to do this by performing an egg driver onto this larger egg. This threw Billy up into the air and onto the nearby wall, in which a dash jump from there was enough to reach the torch. This driver looks simple, but it actually is so precise that I have never seen a human perform one. In fact, I found out when making this video that the old runners used to just throw themselves at it, attempt after attempt, until it worked. This driver alone made this strategy unviable for humans. The task reaches the main pyramid island, and this is where things get strange. You see, despite being an unreachable area, there are actually enemies here. We don't know why they are here, but let's not focus on that. These bees here are gonna help us. The task does an egg bounce near this inflating bee, which knocks Billy and his egg onto the higher ledge. To get both Billy and his egg together with a single knockback is extremely unlikely to happen under normal circumstances. Getting Billy up there is fine, getting the egg up there is fine, but getting both up there, it's just never gonna happen, bro. Billy takes the egg to the side of the pyramid where he drops the egg off the ledge and jumps onto one of the sloped surfaces of the pyramid. Whilst on this slope, Billy begins gaining sliding speed, which allows him to clip through the quicksand death plane and technically be out of bounds with his egg. From there, one final tight dash jump is performed to land into the room directly after Fog Room to complete the skip. This route is seriously cool, but with the reasons mentioned already, it's very unlikely that a human would be able to perform this. And due to the extreme nature of this route, nothing was done about it to even make it humanly possible. However, a few years later, someone would take notice of this route and would discover something incredible. In January of 2017, Mr. Fami entered the Billy Hatcher community. Despite making 2 history videos on this game and the strat finding that went behind the levels that I have covered, Mr. Fami has not been mentioned once yet. This is honestly surprising, as Mr. Fami is the greatest strat finder to ever bless this game. Mr. Fami discovered knockback clipping, a technique that allows you to go through any wall by taking damage whilst holding an egg. This was discovered in the first quarter of 2017, however for the following months, Mr. Fami had been cooking something truly groundbreaking in Sand 2. And in August of 2017, Mr. Fami would post his magnum opus to the Speedrun.com forums. The video wasn't very clear, but he did this.
There we go. We got the skip, guys. We fucking did it.
Mr. Fami managed to manipulate the bee over to the other side of this large gap, and then used the stinger from the bee's inflate attack to knock Billy backwards whilst his back was up against this wall, out of bounds, and directly into the room with the dark portal. This strategy would save a massive amount of time over the method found in the task, but holy cow, this strategy looked insane. Bees in Billy Hatcher are difficult to work with. They come with 2 attacks, a fast, deadly dash attack which will snipe players out of the air with ease, and a slow inflate attack where the bee will attempt to crush the player. Mr. Fami used the bee's dash attack to lure it over to the other side of the gap, whilst avoiding any damage from the attack, which would lead to an early death. He then stayed near the bee to bait an inflate attack where he carefully positioned the bee for its stinger to hit Billy through the floor. Also, Billy had to do this whilst hovering over the quicksand, so if you miss, you die. Mr. Fami performed this using save states, and he called this trick Dark Corvo Skip. However, this trick would later be renamed to Fami Skip. If Fami was using save states to perform this trick, then it was safe to say that this trick was not humanly viable, especially when he was using the egg driver technique from the TAS to get onto the wall, which would take many attempts to make happen. Fami, though, would make a discovery that gave Fami Skip believers hope. There was a new way to get onto the wall. Mr. Fami would discover egg shoot bouncing. This is a technique where you use an egg shoot to fire an egg out and then use another egg to bounce the moment the egg returns back to you, shooting you straight up with a huge amount of height, depending on how well you time the trick. Egg shoot bounces were hard, but they were nowhere near as difficult as doing egg drivers and praying. It may take multiple attempts to hit an egg shoot bounce, but it took a lot less than the previous method. But now there was an easier method to reach the Fami Skip area. Mr. Fami and another runner, Excelor, would begin to experiment with the trick more. They would spend a long time hunting the strat, trying to hit it without save states, letting the timer max out, just to see any semblance of a result. And after grinding for a little while, Mr. Fami managed to get a nice smooth consistency rate of 1 in 80. Excelor kept grinding the trick out, however, and managed to make some progress. And eventually, Excelor would hit Fami Skip in an IL after many attempts. This IL wasn't the fastest, it wasn't even a world record despite hitting the strat, but it proved that someone could do it. But unfortunately, no one else would pick up on Fami Skip. It was too difficult, and soon, Mr. Fami, the world record holder at the time Squid, and many others would start to step away from the game, and Fami Skip would begin to fade to obscurity. Instead of becoming this spectacle, the trick became a meme. Whenever Fami Skip was suggested, it was usually a lol funny suggested by those who knew about the trick. Kappa emotes were usually adjacent to the name of the trick whenever mentioned in a Twitch chat, and sometimes Fami Skip would be reserved for when speedrunners wanted to kill their runs in style. However, even if the memes gave the trick a bad reputation, the fact that Fami Skip remained relevant in any shape or form meant that it would never die, and after 2 years of ridicule, Fami Skip would eventually reach the right person. In September of 2019, Pedro started to speedrun the game after being inspired by another Billy Hatcher speedrunner. Pedro, however, would become more interested in the idea of strat hunting in order to polish the game's speedrun in any way possible. During his year-long stay in the community, Pedro would make some very impressive finds, some of which have been mentioned in my previous videos, and I am sure that the contributions that Pedro made will continue to be mentioned in videos to come. Pedro's efforts to find strategies would not go unnoticed, as Excelor, the only remaining runner from 2017, would introduce Pedro to the world of Fami Skip. Pedro would become immediately enthralled by the trick. How could something so awesome and so beneficial be ignored by the community? Pedro played around with the trick and found that the trick was as difficult as reported, but this did not dissuade Pedro from exploring, and in November of 2019 he would find something that couldn't simply be ignored. Pedro took a page from the TAS's book and looked at getting boosted by the bee onto the higher ledge. Nothing had changed regarding the low odds of getting Billy and the egg onto the ledge. However, with what Pedro was planning, the egg would not be necessary. After getting the damage boost from the bee, Pedro took Billy for a long walk to the side of the pyramid, where he found a spot in which he could make Billy slide down the side of the pyramid and clip through the quicksand, just like the TAS again. However, what made the position that Pedro found special was that Billy will land directly into the room after Fog Room. This was the first humanly viable way to skip the final underground in Sand 2. But unfortunately, this trick didn't take off, and this is due to two reasons. The first reason is that this method only saved a small amount of time and required a first try ESB onto the wall. If you missed a single one, then it was unlikely that you were saving time. The slow walk to the slide spot was just too far to make it worthwhile. However, I do think that this trick would have caught on eventually, but it's just because of the second reason that it never did. And that reason is that the person who inspired Pedro to play the game in the first place was cooking something of their own. In 2019, fellow YouTuber and Mario GOAT Kosmic started to speedrun Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. And over that year, Kosmic would quickly improve and establish himself as one of the game's top players alongside Squid and Shadow Knight. Kosmic became intrigued in Pedro's method to skip the underground, becoming the first top runner to take notice of the skip. Kosmic was in the lab, experimenting with Pedro's strat, improving at it and finding ways to speed up the boost by the bee, because you see, earlier that year, Kosmic had found a way to manipulate which attack a bee performs. In Forest 2, Kosmic discovered that if you dash jump up to a bee and recover close to it, then instead of doing the usual charge attack, the bee would inflate instead. This was done in Forest 2 to make the intended skip through the bee area much more manageable, but in Sand 2, this was used to get onto the higher ledge quicker than Pedro, who baited the bee to charge attack first. However, during this labbing session, something just clicked in Kosmic's mind, and for whatever reason, Kosmic turned his attention away from Pedro's strat and turned towards Fami skip. Kosmic had thought of something massive, and he made the community aware right away. At the time, we weren't sure what he was planning, so all we could do was sit back and wonder, what was he cooking? But after a while, Kosmic would return and post that he had found a way to perform a wall clip similar to that of Fami skip, consistently. So what happened then? Well, Kosmic decided to see if the bee's inflate attack would allow for Fami skip to work. He would bait the bee into inflating, and then he would run and jump across the gap ready to clip, and to his surprise, the bee could reach the wall. However, the bee would unfortunately be in the quicksand before Kosmic was ready to even initiate a clip through the wall. But he didn't stop there. He kept experimenting with this idea. He would try setting up for the clip faster, but that didn't work either. Was this too good to be true? No, because Kosmic would soon discover something about the bee's behaviour that would solve everything. You see, when the bee begins its inflate attack, it must first be looking at Billy. To do so, it will begin to rotate slowly until Billy is in its line of sight. And by using this knowledge of the attack, you can stall the inflate attack for as long as you like. And Kosmic used this to his advantage. By choosing a very specific spot to recover from the dash jump, Kosmic was able to make the bee inflate as late as possible. Whilst the bee before would inflate as Kosmic was starting the jump across the gap, it was now inflating as he was about to finish crossing. This small difference was enough for Kosmic to get into the wall, hold A to stall in the air, and clip. And just like that, Kosmic had solved Fami. Oh, Billy died? At this time, Kosmic was stumped. How come Fami and Excelor could land in the portal room, but Kosmic couldn't? Was it a version difference perhaps? Nope, Kosmic was playing on the same version of the game as Fami and Excelor. We would later find out that the reason why is because the bee stinger can knock Billy further, which is enough to make it into the room, whereas the side of the bee from the inflate attack just doesn't knock back far enough. However, Kosmic was misinformed about the level layout and where the portal room was, and Pedro would point this out to him. Pedro pointed out that if you move over to the right more into this specific corner to clip, then you're actually ever so slightly closer to the dark portal. In fact, this would land you right against the rightmost wall of the dark portal room. If clipping here doesn't work, then it would be back to the drawing board. Kosmic went to immediately try this different position, and all the community did was sit and anxiously wait to see what he had to say. It took 27 months, but Fami Skip had finally been solved. And with that discovery, Sand Tour's level had changed completely, because not only did you have to do torch skip if you wanted to compete for a top time, you also had to perform the new trick that had just trumped torch skip in difficulty. Kosmic was consistent at this setup, and soon, Shadow Knight, the game's world record holder at the time, would become fairly consistent as well. However, for the rest of the community, Fami Skip was unlike anything they had seen before, and it took a while to adjust to. First of all, you still had to hit a precise egg shoot bounce to even have a shot of trying the new B-clip method. This made practice for the trick quite difficult, as the ESB would reduce the amount of attempts a player could have if they were bad at them. Even then, Fami Skip consists of a few crucial steps. 1. You had to perform this tight dash jump and turn the camera whilst landing in the very precise spot to force the bee to inflate late. 2. You had to also move fast and along a tight line to enable the bee's late inflate. 3. You had to not miss the difficult dash jump whilst under the pressure of the bee pursuing you. And 4. You had to get in the absolute correct position on the wall to clip. If any of those steps were done slightly incorrectly, then there was a high chance you weren't performing a successful Fami Skip. And all of these combined would make a massive hurdle to overcome if you wanted to be on the same level as Shadow Knight and Kosmic. The community knew that 2 things had to be done. They had to improve their standard of play, and they also had to find a way to make Fami Skip more accessible. From the inception of Kosmic's Fami Skip setup, nothing had changed once you reached the B, and I believe that everyone knew that this would be the case. So, if you wanted to get better at Fami Skip, then you had to accept that the trick would require more practice than any other trick that came before it. Runners such as Clam and myself, at the time, would practice each individual part of the trick until it became embedded into muscle memory. The positions, the lines, the jumps, they would eventually all become second nature. Practice sessions would take hours at a time, but with each one an improvement was noticeable. And once everything felt mastered, it would be time to practice combining it all together. And eventually, Fami Skip would feel achievable. For anyone wanting to learn this trick after this video, just know that Fami Skip is a set of rules and you have to follow those rules exactly. There is no space for deviation. However, despite all this effort, the egg shoot bounce was no easier, and it was thought that nothing could be done to make them any easier. But Pedro would make a discovery regarding the trick that was a small adjustment that went a long way. It turned out that the ESBs are more effective when Billy is facing the returning egg. We had no idea why this was the case, but the results don't lie. Basically, what this meant for Fami Skip is that even bad ESB attempts had a chance of getting up onto the wall now. It was a lot less strict. And because they got easier, some runners opted to do the ESB in riskier places to save time. Shadow Knight hated the ESB, but that didn't bother him. So instead of talking about what Shadow Knight does, I will show you a clip from Chase for the Record where Shadow Knight performs a Fami Skip on world record pace.
It was done in a really predictable way, and it was really risky, as you can imagine, because you're slipping through a wall just above the death plane, so if you miss it, you're dead. So that's why runners didn't really go for it, but when Kosmic...
That was super risky for Silva. He went for the fastest strat there. Ooh. I think he got it.
Fami Skip, yeah. The first Fami Skip we've seen in the run.
Yeah, so he just skipped the underground part completely.
What Shadow Knight performed is known as an egg dash ricochet. This is an extremely inconsistent trick which, for whatever reason, Shadow was surprisingly good at. It's to no one's surprise that this trick never caught on, but I'll tell you what did catch on: a new discovery by Pedro. So you remember the egg driver boost performed in the TAS? What if I told you there was something similar to this, except it's much easier than before? The results are more effective, and you can do these basically anywhere. This is egg boosting. Egg boosting is done by egg bouncing and landing onto a larger egg. If you land on a specific area of the larger egg's hitbox, then you will go flying. What made the trick easy to perform was texture setups. By finding a meaningful texture to place the larger egg and another meaningful texture to bounce from, you can essentially hold forward out of an egg bounce and get some incredible launches. Very quickly, a method was found for Fami Skip where you could launch off the blue clipper egg and go directly to the torch, skipping the wall. Not only was this easier, this was a lot faster. You have a lot of control in the air whilst using this trick, so you can easily adjust your speed and turn to land on the torch with ease. This is the most popular way of doing Fami Skip to this day, which basically means we have caught up with the history of Fami Skip. So now I think it's a good time to discuss how much time this trick saves. So off the bat, Fami Skip saves 30 seconds of in-game time over going through the fog room, which compared to anything else being discovered at the time was huge. However, as the game is timed using real time and the fog room route comes with 3 additional cutscenes, this trick actually saves closer to 40 seconds. When starting out, it is generally advised not to do Fami Skip because at the end of the day, 40 seconds isn't the biggest amount of time, whereas you could be saving 40 seconds elsewhere much easier by improving important fundamentals. That's also not considering that Fami Skip requires good fundamentals to even pull off in the first place. This trick takes a long time to learn, and the outcome is only really desirable when competing for a top time. But that's the thing about Fami Skip. Yes, the trick is extremely difficult, but in all honesty, it's only difficult during the learning phase. Once you understand everything that goes into the trick, then you'll start to find that it isn't even that bad at the end of the day. If you mess up, that's alright, because this trick gives good feedback towards mistakes that you can troubleshoot and improve from there. And I'd go as far to say that it's a rather lukewarm take to say that the hardest part of Sand 2 is still Torch Skip. Torch Skip, however, is easier to learn and is more valuable. Fami Skip is an awesome trick that we love to show off at community events such as relays and tournaments, and even marathon runs such as Games Done Quick and ESA. Fami Skip is no longer that 1 in 80 trick and is now celebrated for what it is. Fami Skip is Billy Hatcher's coolest skip. But before we finish, let's take a look at how these tricks have been improved further. Starting with Torch Skip, there is now a way to cross the gap without relying on Torch Skip. It's a slower setup that is a good alternative for newer runners, and that's using the old reliable egg boosting technique. For an egg boost, this is quite tight, but again, with good troubleshooting, this becomes quite a useful backup. Fog Room now also uses an egg boost to achieve the same results as the object bounce, and just like the egg boost for Torch Skip, this is also a lot more reliable. These two strategies alone make Sand 2 a lot more friendly for newer runners, which is a welcome addition. So recently, a new method for the egg boost in Fami Skip was found by me. This method is a little bit tougher to execute, but ultimately it isn't too bad and it even saves time. What's different is that, well, you don't egg bounce for this. Take a look. Let's go. Runners such as myself, MonkeySMB, Realmim and Giant Clown have started doing this in runs, though if you want to go super fast, you'd forgo the egg boost and go back to egg shoot bouncing, because egg shoot bounces aren't just useful for gaining height. What you are seeing right now is a distance ESB. They're a lot tighter than a regular ESB, but the results are bonkers. This is extremely precise and extremely punishing, but super rewarding, and is usually reserved for when MonkeySMB and Kosmic are on bad runs or for an individual level speedrun. Realmim and myself have started to go for another bonkers strategy. I'm not even going to explain this one, so take a look at this.
Hit it! Yo!
Let's go! The final strategy to look at is reserved for TASes at the moment. This is a concept known as seam clipping. Basically, if you collide with a seam between two objects with a perfect angle, speed and position, you can go through the wall that it's connected to. This was found by Pedro, but Realmim is currently doing a lot of research on this trick. So with these developments in mind, Sand 2's story is far from over, and I am excited to see what happens next. I'll be honest, I don't know how to end this video, because I summarised it pretty well by saying that Fami Skip is one of the coolest skips in Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. But honestly, Sand 2 as a whole level is just fantastic. I think the fact that a single stage can elicit a very similar response from an entire community based on its reputation alone is amazing. This is a video that took so long to come out because Sand 2 is special. I wanted the video to be done right, and instead of doing some half-baked outro, I think I will leave you with this. Thank you for watching.
Sand 2 is a pretty cool level. It's one of those like love-hate levels in the speedrun because it's like full of cool tricks, but also it's super hard.
I'm always a fan of the longer levels. I feel like there's like a lot of variance and a lot of room for experimentation with strats, and
it's certainly the scariest level.
I think Sand 2 is probably one of the best levels in the game from a speedrun perspective, but it's also definitely the scariest one.
Yeah, Sand 2, it's a very interesting level. I'm not very good at it, and it does frustrate me.
Yeah, it's like in general, it's very scary, and it's just everything. It's just all the pressure is coming together to that one point in the run. It's just all the feelings are just overwhelming. It is a very cool level. Like it's like if you hit it everything, it's just the best feeling. Like you just think, oh yeah, that was just very cool that I just did. It was like, yeah, I just did that. I nailed that. It's just so cool if you do it. Yeah.
Sand 2 was the most difficult maybe because of the new strats that we were trying to incorporate into it. But it also was the coolest for me because in reality, for me, speedrunning was the most fun when you break the game.
And it's pretty late in the run, so sometimes it kills your runs and you're like, stupid Sand 2, but then other times you nail it and you're like, this game's awesome, right? Torch skip's a really cool trick. I always love tricks where you look like you're about to die, or like you clearly will die if you mess them up just even slightly, and Sand 2 is full of those, right? Just always over the sand. There's a bunch of objects we bounce off of in this game to go flying, and of course in like the most precarious one where you fly over the sand, you also have to bounce off of the torch, which is like a live fire that you can get hit by. So overall, I think, you know, it's a trick that players will get really annoyed by because every now and then you're just gonna mess it up. It's pretty tight timing, but I'm glad it exists because it's really cool.
Like in general, it should be easy. It feels like it's easy, but at the end, it's kind of not. It's very hard to explain.
It's a run killer for sure. Torch skip is so infamous, there's a channel for it dedicated to clips in the Discord. But torch skip is something you can practice and get better at. It's really cool, and it's the first true gatekeeper, I think, in Billy.
it's a particularly difficult trick, mainly because of the way that it's sort of... It doesn't have a nice lineup or, you know, simple way of doing it.
You want to do torch skip or some version of it, because it's going to be one of the biggest tricks in one of the biggest skips in the run that you absolutely have to do.
I hate it as I cannot find any consistency at all with it. It's not luck, but it's luck.
Yeah, I remember messing with the original Fami skip. You were like doing these multiple bounces and then like had to go down right as the bee was poking down. It was really stupid, but I knew even that version had to at least be in run someday because it just saves so much time. I figured someday we're gonna mess with this, we'll figure it out.
So initially when I found out about it, I wasn't even really sure what I was looking at, you know, because it was so different from the normal route that I was just like, okay, where am I, you know, like, and it took you know, many attempts where the entire timer of the level was maxed out, you know, like there was no chance that I could get it consistently in a run.
It really caught my attention on how to do it, how to develop any strat or any way that it could be repeated. And I remember also one time that we were staying in a call, you and me, and we were like just doing things, trying to see if we could find anything.
Yeah, I remember Pedro came up with this other way to get down there. where you like slide through the sand by sliding down the pyramid. So I was messing with the bees to try and figure out something with that. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I have this thing that I do in Forest 2 to make the bee inflate so he doesn't charge at me. Maybe I can just use that attack to clip through the ground. And so all the pieces kind of finally came together, and it took a little bit to even figure out where to clip so I could land in, but dude, that was such a great feeling, great moment when I figured out you could just consistently clip like really easily off of this bee in comparison to the old way, just way easier.
Oh boy, where should I start? Fami skip. The first time I've heard about it was like, nah, I ain't doing that. Like, then again, it's very cool when you hit it. Like, it's so cool.
It's just so flashy, right? If you want to show somebody why Billy Hatchet is a sick game, you show them the trick and then they'll be like, okay, this game is so cool, I have to run it right now.
So I've done Fami skip a few times, but I've never done it in a run. There's a lot of moving parts, but I think Fami skip, honestly, shows off the coolest parts of Billy, like back to back.
Like behind the scenes, like deep down in the nitty gritty mechanically, Fami skip is really cool because again, you're just right over a pit of sand, barely getting knocked down to where the boss is. It like just barely works. You know, you go in the wireframes, you like see he barely gets in there, and you're so close to death, and you have to manipulate the enemy. You're in a part of the level that you're like not even supposed to be on that mission. It's awesome.
My opinion on Fami skip is that it's one of the most important developments in Billy Hatcher's speedrunning.
I just want to end this video by saying thank you for getting to this point. This video took a lot of effort to create, so having people enjoy this video from start to finish means a lot. Please support the video and the channel by liking the video, commenting and subscribing. If you know anyone who would enjoy this video, please share it with them. Thank you to everyone featured in the video, and a big shout out to Tylltoons, Christian Royal and Realmim for reviewing parts of the video and giving feedback. And finally, thank you to the people who have supported the channel during my hiatus. I am so grateful that you have all been so patient with me. The next video is already in the planning stage, so I shouldn't be gone too long. Thank you all for watching.